It's mute. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on 360-degree feedback, the practices in it, and the critical success factors for the same. I'm Urvi Raichandani, and I represent Naman, an organization working in the space of HR consulting. And we support our clients into various areas. Let's quickly look at what we do, and then I'll walk you through the webinar onto it. Just hold on for a moment, please. So, as I was sharing about our organization in brief, we work in the area of assessing, consulting, and developing, wherein assessing we cover 360-degree feedback, also psychometric profiling using various psychometric tests and tools like 16PF, Hogan, MBTI, and so. We also kind of support our clients in terms of assessment and development centers, and also include virtual assessments, and also help in terms of organizational diagnostic studies like employee engagement surveys, training needs identification across various levels, etc. In the space of consulting, we provide services in terms of core HR practices, like designing and implementation of organization structure, performance management systems and processes, etc. And also work a lot in the area of OD interventions, wherein we especially support clients and partner with them for developing and working towards creating quality culture, for example, and inculcating various systems and processes that are required. In area of development, we specifically also work closely with clients on long-term interventions like leadership development, standalone programs, a lot of work that we do in the space of strengths-based development and coaching. So that's a brief about our organization. Let's get started with our topic for the day, which is around 360-degree feedback. This topic is not very new to all of us. And in that context, in our day-to-day lives, we directly, indirectly, and formally or informally receive feedback from a lot of people around us. Our closed ones are some of our colleagues or some of our stakeholders at workplace as well. And whether we like it or not, but we sometimes receive them off the cuff, and many times we take that into consideration and also make certain changes in ourselves. Likewise, if we see 360-degree feedback, which is more of a corporate or a formalized way to get feedback for the individual in the work setup, which is also known as multi-rater or multi-level or multi-source feedback and assessment. 360-degree feedback is a systematic process which is a confidential and an anonymous way to capture feedback for an individual in a business environment. It's considered, and it's surely a very sensitive yet a very powerful developmental tool, which can aid an individual for one's development. And especially it reaps a lot of benefit when it is conducted on a regular interval, and when to capture and to track the behavioral changes that one observes in that particular individual. If we look at a quick history of 360-degree feedback, um, it laid back, or it started somewhere in around World War II by the German military, and it was specially used for soldiers at that point in time to evaluate them for and to help them develop insights in their performance and to improve their performance, where feedback was again captured from the peers, the supervisors, or the subordinates of those soldiers. Which is again like the assessment and the development centers, which started way back then at that time. Currently, and as it progressed from that point in time, it's since 1950, again, it became more formalized, and later on it gained popularity, and a lot of this aspect was adopted by the corporates. And currently, if we see, most of the Fortune 500 companies, and a part of that, many of the other companies have been using 360-degree feedback for varied purposes and applications. So some of the applications that we have been using, or across the globe, if we see, the applications include development a lot. It's used for developmental initiatives, be it for individual or leadership development, also used as a powerful tool for identifying training needs. A part of it, a lot of organizations have been using it as a part of succession planning. Some of us have been using, or some of our clients have used it for succession planning as well. Also, that it is used for career development and also the performance appraisals. If we see, a lot of us may have a question in terms of we have a question in terms of what is it that it measures. So in that context, 360-degree feedback covers core or role specific competencies and its behavioral expectations that people expect or the organization expects from that individual. Also that it covers elements related to derailers. What is derailers is what we may have a question at that. So derailers are some of those limiting or inhibiting behaviors if an individual demonstrates may surely have a negative and non-facilitating impact on others, especially at workplace as well. A quick example here could be in terms of, for example, a leader. While the leader is expected to be approachable, be appreciative and motivating of the team members, if the same person, instead of providing a constructive feedback, tends to give makes negative remarks a lot often, may not have a positive and would have an inhibiting a negative impact on the team members. And that is what derailers mean, that one should refrain from using them. The third element that it covers is in terms of the subjective and the qualitative qualitative and open-ended questions that get covered within the 360-degree feedback. In that context, what is it that it covers, or who all does it cover? Who all does it cover in that context? Just hold on for a moment, please. Yeah. So in that context, who all gets covered as part of this initiative of 360-degree feedback? So if we see, a lot of organizations have been using it for the senior management and for the middle management executives. A lot of organizations where we have conducted 360-degree feedback have used it for, again, similar group of employees, that is senior management and the middle management. In one of the surveys that we had, or one of the studies that we had also conducted, in recent past, it demonstrated, or the analysis also indicated the same, that 97% of the respondents felt that they have used it for senior management, and somewhere middle management also get covered highly onto it. There are few organizations who also extend the same for junior management or some of the executives as well in that context. The perspective could be as to why and for what could be those reasons why only the senior management gets covered in that context. I would say that it's a very sensitive process as we looked at it, and creating a buy-in, creating that urge to get feedback and leveraging onto it becomes very, very critical and very, very crucial. From that, it brings us to the perspective to know what would be the difference between 360 or a 270 and a 180-degree feedback. We may have that question in our mind. 360, as we said, is a process which covers the respondents who are from within the peers or the superiors or the subordinates, and also customers or vendors at times of that particular executive or an individual. The purpose when 360 could be used, we have already looked at it, but when we differentiate them with some of the other, that is 270 and 180, we will look and come back at that as well in a while. Looking at 270-degree feedback is where the individual, the stakeholder covered there are the seniors or the reporting managers, the team members, and the peers of the individuals. And that's where the customers or the external vendors might not be covered for that process. And in a 180-degree feedback, the individual's manager and the team members or the direct reports are the ones which gets covered. In all these three aspects, the self is not ignored, which means that the individual provides feedback or response for self as well, besides the other category of people that we talked about. What could be the purpose when this three could be used? So as I earlier mentioned, 360-degree feedback could be used for the purpose of succession planning. I am aware of an organization where they actually used it for succession planning along with assessment centers, based on which they decided who can take up the role that was shortlisted or that was considered for. And it becomes a very powerful data point to see whether the individual who's getting assessed, though may have the capabilities and the competencies, are the same viewed favorably by other organizations, especially the peers in that lines. So that's why succession planning is an area that one may want to be using it. Also used as a for potential assessment of managers, or for training needs identification, and also to see how to enhance customer centricity, because that's where one of the category also gets included into it besides the performance appraisal. 270-degree could become a good tool for pre and post interventions while a development program is considered. We have been using it widely for during our long-term interventions, and using 270 as a pre and a post assessment to see how that participant is being perceived at this point versus after the intervention, how that perceived. Is there an observable difference within that individual's behavior with respect to the expectations other had for him or her? And besides it, also helps cater or focus onto internal customers and how to enhance the internal customer satisfaction in that context. Versus 180-degree, as I would see it, and as we have used it for a couple of our clients, 180 degrees used widely for the purpose of development, especially the leadership development initiative in that context. I do remember an example here, having done 180 for two of our clients, where the specific objective was to enhance employee engagement of a team, where manager play a vital role, and that's where it became a very useful tool in that context. Looking to further as to with all these things, we now do know what are the benefits of 360-degree feedback. For the individual, what does it do? Just about 2-3 days back, I remember one of the clients who is a non-HR professional asking me a question that how is this session going to help those individuals who are not HR professionals? What would be the takeaway for those individuals by attending this session of today? My response was that it would become handy, or it would become useful to know in the context as to how do I receive feedback? What should I consider when I'm a part of any such initiative of 360 or a 180-degree or a 270 feedback process? Also, for those people who are a part of designing this initiative or designing 360, I think it's very important to know what to expect as an outcome and with what objective that they are starting. And obviously for the organization, that it should have the benefit at the end that it meets the business objective. So looking quickly at some of the benefits for the individual, it enhances the self-awareness based on how others perceive that individual versus how one perceives oneself. How much is the similarity, or how much is the gap in the perception? Besides that, based on the report of 360-degree feedback, it further enhances or gives an opportunity to the individual to develop an action plan for further progress and further growth. Which in turn also enhances individuals' skills and performance and effectiveness for the role that one is considered. Very vital is that it brings in the alignment between what others expect of me and what I perceive they expect of me. So I think that that's very powerful, that it brings in that alignment among the expectation, and one strives towards meeting those expectations. Looking at the organization and the benefits for the organization, all those organizations who have been using it, and I'm sure that some of you who are part of this interaction today would also support to that thought, that wherever that 360-degree feedback is being conducted, and when it's a repeated process, it enhances and builds open communication within the organization. Individuals are more open to share their views. They are more open in terms of expressing their thoughts with others, be it in terms of their own individual's thoughts toward the other person. More openness in terms of giving and receiving feedback. That's what it further develops. Also, that it steers that process of learning orientation amongst employees at large, and that's where it builds a culture of learning and development, because the process doesn't just end at capturing feedback. It further is dovetailed in the process of developing IDPs and ensuring the actions are taken further. It helps in terms of enhancing the customer satisfaction and retaining the customers as well, because that's where the customers also share their expectation, and the individual strives to work towards it, and the employees at large work towards satisfying the customers' expectations. Further, that it fosters that culture where there is partnership, there is collaboration, there is also, as we saw, the openness and also more quality and performance orientation that it yields. Overall, it helps in terms of organizational effectiveness, And when 360 becomes a part of other HR systems and processes, the entire system becomes more powerful and more contributing overall, is where it has a lot of benefits for the organization. One of the key element also is in terms of having alignment between what I perceive versus the organizational values and organizational goals. So brings a lot of alignment amongst employees for organizations' goals, values, and vision and mission. From that context, is everything good when we go ahead with 360? Again, just about a few days back, one of my colleagues asked me that though 360-degree feedback sounds really beneficial and helpful, I'm sure that there might be some pitfalls as well. True, that's what every intervention or initiatives has a pros and cons as well. Here I would say that in terms of what is it that one should keep in mind or to avoid, or what is it that can lead as some of the disadvantages for 360 feedback is, first and foremost, that it's a perception that we're capturing around specified observable behaviors, and that is why where the perceptions of individuals may vary as well, in terms of though it is observable, which may indicate that it is raising a lot of benchmark for the individual where he or she may not be able to meet up to all the expectations of all the stakeholders. So managing expectations at times becomes a challenging task. The another key element which may become a challenge is in context that if there's an initiative of 360 taken versus where there's no actions followed by it may fizzle out and the entire objective would remain non-achieved, which may further lead to demotivation and impact the buy-in of the same employees for later initiatives as well. Another element also is in terms of the selection of the raters. How experienced, how effective are the raters or the responders in terms of providing candid feedback for the individual. So that's critical thing which brings in that perspective. And many times it may so happen that some of the raters may be using this tool to settle scores with someone, probably. And that is where the orientation of the respondents or the raters is very, very critical to be considered when organization is initiating some such process. Any initiative may not reach to its full potential or full use if there is no commitment from the top management, and if it isn't included or dovetailed with HR systems and processes. And that's where, again, at least I have observed in some or few cases that where the buy-in or the commitment of top management was failing, the entire initiative, though the participants were committed, the process didn't end that well. We'll look at two of the critical elements now quickly, because I'm sure that the earlier things that we covered, most of us might be aware about as well. But in terms of what all things to consider when designing a 360-degree feedback and for effective implementation of the same, I'll just quickly share an overview to it and I'll walk you through that in process. Let me share the slides, please. So looking at the design of, looking at the process and design of 360-degree feedback, it's very, very critical that the entire start to end process is taken up with utmost sincerity. The first and the foremost thing is to have clear, objective, defined as to why this initiative is undertaken. Um, many of the organization just take it up as a fancy thing to do, but without having a clear objective in mind. And that's where it may not serve the entire process. And that's where I would strongly recommend that defining a clear objective for 360 or any such feedback process is very, very critical. And from that would further stem the criteria on which assessment or feedback is to be captured. So if the purpose is succession planning, if the objective, as I said, if it's a succession planning or training needs identification, that's where the parameters would be different versus if I am assessed for a developmental initiative for my current role. So again, defining the criteria for assessment or for capturing feedback is critical, based on which the tool for assessment or 360-degree feedback survey is carried out. The next important element is the rating scale. Many a times it would so happen that individuals, without giving much thought, select any of the rating scales, and there isn't any science behind it, probably is what people feel. But I would stand corrected here onto that it's carefully chosen what rating scale to be used. A yes and a no, or those kinds of scales may not serve the purpose. Second, it is suggestive to use a wider scale, which does not have an element of central tendency to it, so that it gives opportunity to the raters to be able to differentiate two behaviors or two different people clearly. Besides that, it's important what kind of rating scale that we select. For example, is it a frequency-based rating scale in terms of how frequently one demonstrates given behaviors, or should it be effectiveness scale as to how effectively one demonstrates those behaviors? So they have different kinds of rating scales, and again, those would be required to be thoughtfully picked in that context. Moving to the next context, which is selecting of the respondents and raters. In that context, if we see in that context, if we see the selection of respondents is again very, very critical. Who should be giving feedback for me? If we see in that context, the raters should be carefully chosen. Many times, the participants or the HR professionals or the HR team who selects the respondents for the individual, they either randomly pick it up without giving much a thought. They select individuals who are less familiar to the individual, or and that is what would not give an accurate picture. So certain things that one may want to keep in mind while selecting the respondents or raters is first and foremost that the individual should have good amount of familiarity with that person for whom they are giving the feedback. Even if they are new, it would be suggestive to have maybe 3 to 6 months of work experience with that person and frequent interaction. Second, could be in terms of that person who is able to provide candid feedback for that individual. Many times when the participants select the respondents, what they may tend to do is either they select people who are going to provide positive and favorable responses, or they may select individuals who are really critical and they do not have a positive relationship with. In both the cases, the report or the analysis will not show complete or a true picture, but would have skew on either side. And that is where we would want to have selection of raters done based on who we perceive are more candid and forthright. The next critical element is orienting the participants and the raters or the respondents. So as we discussed earlier, the objective should be very, very clear to the participants and also to the raters. Also that we recommend that there are special sessions taken up for all of them so that they're well versed and they're sincere to this process and they're more committed to this entire process of receiving and giving of feedback. I understand that it would be a challenge if there's a huge number of participants and many of the raters, it would be practically and logistically difficult to conduct those orientations over in person, but it might also be done through various other tools, the one which we are using, for example, at this point in time, or through mail or through other means and mode. It might also be a good idea wherein a participant himself talking to the raters in terms of expressing the sincerity to get feedback from that individual, which will further promote that candidness from the raters. Important also is in terms of based on the tools and all the selection and the legwork that we have done is to actually launch the survey or conduct the survey. Some years back, the survey was more often done manually or maybe using soft copies, and I've tried my hands on both of it. And I would vouch that doing it online is much easier. And in that case, there are systems now that are designed to conduct online 360-degree feedback. For example, we own our own portal called nimspiresurvey.com, and we launch a lot of 360-degree feedback using this portal. Many organizations have their own systems and their own portals for the same. This makes capturing data feasible. It also aids in terms of data collation and data analysis much easier. And many systems are also capable of generating online reports then and there. So makes the entire process smooth in time and with speed. Only thing which I like to bring in here is many of the individuals or client organizations ask us as to for how long should a survey be kept open. My response to that would surely be that it may range from something like 10 days to maximum 15 days, depending on the number and the volume of responses that are to be captured. We may not want to forget that when there are a lot of participants going through this process, and within that, some individuals or the respondents are going to be common. I have experience where some of the individuals or raters had to provide almost about 15 to 20 feedback for 15 to 20 people. Now, this may become a little tiring process or a monotonous process when one would sit and do it at one go without giving much a thought. So if it is spread out, it gives opportunity to that respondent and the rater to kind of spread the work across few days. Moving to downloading the report and creating report, I think we all surely aware that that's the next process that it would support with. When we talk about report, the best practices indicate that report should cover some of the aspects like, besides the summary or around various competencies, should include competency-wise details in terms of which behaviors, what category of people have perceived it how, what are the highest and the bottom or the top and the bottom rated items within that, or even essential to have a benchmark score so that if I am one of the receivers of the report, I know where do I stand against other group of people, be it in my organization or across the industry sector in that particular role. So that's what the report should cover. Not to forget that based on the report, it's essential that the participant receives the report and is able to go through the report, and also have an opportunity, if possible, to interact with the coach who facilitates the entire process of report sharing. It might seem to be an easy thing that, okay, hand over the report to the individual and that should make sense. I think based on my experience, I would strongly recommend that there's some third party who does this job, because then that would help prepare the participant to receive the report in the right spirit, also help clarify some of the aspects, and further help plan the actions for it. Without the support of the manager, the development process may not be complete, and that's where it's essential to have a developmental dialogue with the manager as well. And once that is done and the actions are planned and one has started implementing those actions, it is critical and essential that changes are measured or the results are measured. And if it is again the process of capturing developmental aspect, reassessment is strongly recommended. And that is what will motivate the individual towards behavioral change. So very much essential that reassessment is carried out. Quite a lot of organization have been doing it. Some of our clients, as I am talking, I could recall, have been using 360-degree feedback for almost more than 6 years now, and we have conducted 360 for them at least 3 times in this 6 years, maybe at the interval of 1.5 years or so, which has become a very powerful tool for them in context to not only development, but it is very well integrated with their performance management system and as a part of performance appraisal and developmental process. With that, with that coverage of what to do and what to expect when it comes to designing the 360-degree feedback, there are certain critical factors which are very essential to be considered for the success of the 360-degree feedback. Again, as I mentioned, in the recent past, we had conducted a study to know the overall effectiveness of 360-degree feedback. And we were also trying to understand as to what are those factors which contribute towards the success of 360. And as we look up here in this slide, there are certain elements which are very essential if we think that 360-degree feedback should be helpful in the process. The first and foremost of the same would be having in-depth report sharing with the participants, which I just mentioned a while ago. Any initiative, so if I have been a participant and if I do not receive the report or I do not receive the feedback regarding where I and others have contributed, I think the entire initiative fizzles out and it doesn't serve the purpose. And in that context, participants have actually mentioned their satisfaction where they felt that the report was covered or shared with them versus where it was not shared with them. Besides that, the next important element is clearly communicating the purpose and the objective, not only with the feedback receiver, but with the feedback giver or the raters. That would create that motivation and commitment amongst them as well. I think it's very essential to create that buy-in amongst everyone for this process. Wherein the third aspect says that if all of it is done, but no developmental actions are planned, there's no use of it. And that's what even organizations and even the participants who have gone through this process did mention, that if there were developmental actions planned, later the report sharing, it become a very helpful tool further on. Confidentiality of the feedback giver. um, generally based on the experience of doing a lot of report sharing and 360-degree feedback, many times participants, when they receive the report, they struggle or they are curious to know who has said what. And that is where when the identity of the feedback giver, if it is made known, the feedback giver becomes their commitment is lost from the process. Their candidness, their openness, their frankness is marred in the process. And that is where confidentiality becomes very, very essential in the context. From the top, as individual rated it, clearly defined purpose, which we already talked about though, but is a critical element as well. If 360-degree feedback is not integrated with other systems and processes, it may become one of the thing, but may not become an integral part of the entire process. And to make it an integral part and to reap the benefits of it, it is essential it becomes one of the elements of HR systems and processes, or it's integrated well. For example, as I mentioned, in terms of be it performance appraisals or succession planning or developmental initiatives. Commitment from the participant and feedback givers, I think we did talk about it just about a while ago. And not to forget, the commitment from the top management is critically essential as well. Openness of the culture of an organization to initiate such process. When I read this, I remember one of the organizations where we actually had worked with them for 360-degree feedback, wherein the organization, as I would analyze, probably was not very ready at that point in time to take up this initiative. The reasons were that their performance management system was purely a traditional approach of yearly performance appraisal. They didn't have forums where they may exchange feedback, or they may be open to discuss about such things. And even though we conducted 360-degree feedback, I would at this point in time feel that probably somewhere the participants or even the feedback receivers were not very, very open for the entire process. Confidentiality of the reports, it should obviously go to individual who it belongs to first and foremost, and with that person's consent is where it further goes to others, or it can be communicated much beforehand to the participants as to who all the report would be made accessible. Accountability and the other piece we have already talked about. Any initiative, if it isn't linked or related with the business needs and strategies, I think it may not serve the purpose as far as the organizational context is concerned. However, if you're using this for an individual purpose, so that's where, again, the objective should be clear. These days, a lot of individuals take this initiative to get feedback for themselves from their colleagues or other stakeholders as an independent person, where there may not be a organization's intervention. And that is where, as I was mentioning earlier, the learning orientation of that person, the urge to develop oneself is the key element out there. Having proper selection of feedback giver, we have talked about it. And the last element is in terms of use of survey tool, and well-designed survey tool with proper rating scale is very, very critical. So that's all that I thought I would like to share today with all of you, so that it helps you if you're going through 360-degree feedback in future for yourselves, what all things to expect. What do you do for yourselves to be able to reap the benefit of it? Or if you're a person who's executing and designing this, helps you also to keep all these points in mind. We'll take the questions at this point, if there are any, and let me quickly get back to the screen at this point. Yes, and where? Right. Let's see who will have the questions. What is? Yeah. So, yep, good evening, Mr. Mani, and good to have you here. The question you have is, what's the validity of 360-degree feedback? And what about strong biases and training? How does it help in enhancing customer experience? A lot of questions. Great. The first thing which I would say, in terms of the validity of 360-degree feedback, I would say that I was also looking at some of the research papers, and as I would say that in one of the studies that was conducted, wherein it assessed to know the predictive validity of 360-degree feedback, or in that case, a feedback as a process for assessment for recruitment. It said that it seems to have quite a bit of validity over some of the to an extent, personality tools or certain other psychometric tools, so to say. But yeah, there would be many other tools which may become more objective as a process to capture predictive validity for the individual. And that's where we have also coupled, if I would share, coupled 360-degree feedback with assessment centers at certain points in time, or coupled it with some of the other tools as well. And that is where it enhances the validity of 360-degree feedback. Coming to the element of how does it help in enhancing customer experience, I would say that let's say when I go through the assessment feedback process, and my customers or my clients who I frequently interact with have provided certain expectations in form of this structured feedback, it gives me an idea as to what are their needs, what are the expectations. And when I work around onto it, it somewhere leverages or it somewhere enhances my experience and their experience working with me. And that's where overall, when a lot of executives go through it and they become customer focused and more customer centric, that is where the customer, I'm sure, is going to benefit out of it. I'm looking at some of the other questions. Often the person who receives the feedback chooses the rater. This lowers the validity. I would say, based on my experience, that may happen, probably, yes. But that's where the orientation of the participants or the feedback receiver is very, very critical as to why, what's the objective of this entire thing, and hence what kind of selection of raters would be helpful. If they feel that the process is non-threatening, it's not going to put them at stakes and their jobs at stake, I'm sure their selection is going to be much fair. That's one thing. The other kind of thing is that once what we also practice is that once the participant selects the raters, we get the same validated through the manager or the HR team, where they may probably want to make some changes or in consultation with the participant again, which then further enhances the validity of the raters in that context. All right. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions. So unless there are any other people signing in, no, I don't see any. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining in for this session. And we look forward to having you again on some other session, some other time. Happy evening and have a great new year ahead. Thank you so much.